Hello and welcome to this GTR Africa 2020 virtual event looking at the UK's plans, priorities and strategies for trade across the African continent. I'm John Basquill, I'm a senior reporter in GTR's editorial team. I'm delighted to say I'm joined today by Emma Wade-Smith. Emma is the UK government's trade ambassador for Africa. Welcome, Emma. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. As I said, we're going to be looking at the UK's priorities for trade across the African continent. And of course, we'll take a look at how those plans may be affected by some of the broader issues we've seen this year. But before we jump into that, Emma, you were appointed Trade Commissioner for Africa in June 2018, so just over 2 years ago. I wonder, just to start us off, could you tell us a bit more about why that role was created, what your mandate is, and maybe what the impact of that mandate has been so far?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, the Department for International Trade itself was created on the back of the Brexit referendum and the decision for the UK to leave the European Union. And it was brought together because we knew that for the first time in decades, the UK would have its own independent trade policy. But we didn't actually have anyone who was doing that at the time, really. So the Department for International Trade has this mandate which covers right from trade policy, so looking at our free trade arrangements, working at the WTO, looking at market access barriers and how we can really tackle that to create more open, more free-flowing trade and investment across the world, and also includes like the good old stuff that UKTI, UK Trade and Investment, which existed beforehand, was very renowned for, which is the trade and investment promotion work. So the department itself sort of brought all of that together. And on the back of that, we were looking at how do we actually bring about a step change in the way that the UK government supports trade and investment flows globally. And part of that was looking at how do we build greater efficiency and more impact from the work that we do directly with UK companies and with global buyers out around the world. And from that concept really trickled this idea of creating 9 amalgamated overseas regions, each of which led by a trade commissioner. So I had been sat in Africa for a couple of years during all of that process. And indeed, when I first got to South Africa, was immediately sort of looking at how do we work more closely together across the individual trade and investment teams that we had then. And so I was already sort of well on that process to sort of integration and collaboration when we created the Trade Commissioner concept. And had that idea of a Pan-African trade and investment team endorsed by the direction of travel around the world. And so as the Trade Commissioner for Africa, my role is around increasing the value and the volume of trade and investment between the African continent and the UK. And we do that, as I said, covering the whole mandate of the department, starting from the very top, the global bits. How do we work with Africa's members at the World Trade Organization? How do we influence G20 discussions around reducing protectionist measures, encouraging more free trade, and then you get down into the sort of the nitty-gritty really. How do we work with governments across Africa to improve the business environment and make it easier for companies to do what they do, get the business done, and then how do we directly match and support, find buyers, find suppliers, find entrepreneurs, find investors, and match those together to really enable and support and hopefully speed up some of that business activity. So in a nutshell, that's it. Across Africa, we are based in 23 countries of Africa's 54. That includes in North Africa. A lot of people think maybe it's just a sub-Saharan thing. This is a whole African continent approach. And we focus in on providing market knowledge and sector knowledge so that we can really help companies navigate the individual challenges in countries, but also understand from an industry perspective what's happening in infrastructure or renewable energy, for example.
Great, thank you. And in the spirit of encouraging free trade between the UK and across African markets, this year started, of course, with this landmark UK-Africa Investment Summit in London. So, of course, since then, we've seen COVID-19 resulting in containment measures, lockdowns, and so on. And that's really presumably changed the direction of some of the plans set out in that event. How has your role and the role of the UK government changed as a result of the pandemic?
Well, just to endorse your comment about the UK Africa Investment Summit, I mean, it was an extraordinary moment, really, in London, bringing together nearly 2,000 British and African government leaders, business leaders, to really reinforce this message about our commitment to work together, to partner in business, with our own Prime Minister establishing very clearly our ambition, our goal to be Africa's business partner of choice. And it's an extraordinary day wrapped around with lots of amazing events on country-specific activity, sector-specific events, to really reinforce this message about the breadth and the depth of opportunities across the African continent, as well as emphasising and highlighting all the existing business activity that's going on as a way to try to inspire more stuff. And you know, it was, what, 9 months ago now? It feels like a lifetime ago, because of course we've had this global pandemic in the meantime. And what we've done, as soon as we started to see these global lockdowns and other restrictions coming on board, you know, we took a very swift, hard look at what are we doing in Africa specifically to support companies and to ensure that we kept the conversation going with governments, looking to understand, you know, how do you respond to something such as a black swan event like this? So thinking about what we did, we really reinforced our business engagement. We held a series of sectoral and industry-focused roundtables to really understand actually what are our companies doing in Africa, what impact has the pandemic had, and how can we help navigate some of those additional challenges that the pandemic brought in. And I think one of the great things for me, really heartwarming things for me, was actually that we were seeing, you know, UK companies really reinforcing their commitment to Africa despite the challenges that was being felt globally. And we haven't seen a single company leaving the African continent over the last 9 months or so. But it was also really great to see how companies were pivoting. And I think we've seen this around the world, but in Africa, you know, it really felt very real for people that you had companies that were producing hand sanitizers and making sure that they were distributed to local communities, that, you know, and transforming some of their production in order to do that. We were supporting the creation, you know, the manufacture of PPE, not just for the UK market, and that was quite an exciting moment too, to see that Africa can provide, you know, for UK needs as well, but also making sure that that went out to local communities. We've been doing an awful lot of work around healthcare to really connect demand and supply and ensure that. But the really crucial thing and the cross-cutting thing has really been around logistics, if you like. So we saw, you know, aircraft just grounded. You know, how can you move goods around the world without access to cargo flights? So we did a lot of work with the airlines and with sort of big exporting African countries, their governments, to make sure that we could get those supply chains moving as quickly as possible. And then at a global level, you know, we've been talking about how we ensure that any protectionist measures that were brought in to respond to the immediate needs of the pandemic are as short and as niche as they absolutely have to be, so that we can get back to a state that we were beforehand, of really seeing and enabling the flow of trade.
That's great, thank you. Presumably putting some of those contingency plans into action and keeping things moving relies really heavily on having good relationships on the ground. And one of the things we hear about trade between the UK and Africa is that arrangements are often relationship driven. But then maybe a negative side of that could be that it can be hard for new companies to forge those ties. and to gain a foothold in a new market. How can firms that aren't used to exporting to Africa build those relationships, and can the UK government help in that?
Well, yes, we absolutely can help in that. And that's a key part of what we have done for a long time, and looking at how we can innovate with that. But I mean, I think, let me just sort of take a step back. I think business at any level in any part of the world is based on relationships. And I think that really goes to the heart of how people find companies to work with, whether that is as a joint venture and as a partner, or actually just as a buyer and a seller. And I think that trust and the personal relationships is absolutely key. It's not just an African thing, but we do recognise how important it is in doing trade and investment. So in the past, where we've had trade missions or business missions, where we've had supplier fairs and tried to bring buyers and suppliers together to be able to make those personal connections. Of course, that's so you just can't do that physically at the moment. And so we've been, I suppose, pivoting, flexing our style, I suppose you'd like to say, to respond to the continuing need to keep building and keep driving the business flows and help more companies connect with the right people on the ground in Africa. So that has been through a number of webinars, sort of an avalanche of webinars, really, at a market level, as well as at a sector level, to help companies understand what the opportunities are, and to start to get to a sense of who the people are they want to build a relationship with. And we're also exploring the way of using this technology now to take those relationships to the next level, and how can we help to do as much of that relationship building as you can, when frankly you're just talking to a screen with a live person behind it, but to get people so far down the line so that once those global travel restrictions do start to diminish, we're not starting from a blank piece of paper. And so I'm confident that we can get quite some way in that relationship building phase, before you start to hit that moment where you really do want to get in a room with somebody. You really do want to eyeball them, get a sense of who they are, physically, face to face. But there's all sorts of stuff that we can do around that.
Great. Okay. And how important is it in those relationships that the UK companies emphasize sustainability in terms of a commitment to long-term employment and sustainable relationships on the ground in those markets where they're doing business?
Well, look, I think one of the sort of USPs of the UK business community that I think works really well in an African context is this point about the way we do business, our ethical, values-driven, community-inspired approach to doing business, which enables us not just to make some money, because otherwise what's the point, but to do it in a way that really drives improvements in our local environments. That for me is actually really at the heart of how we promote the UK in an African context. And we see time and time again where we've got investors and we've got long-term exporters. The key to success really is around how you embed yourself in that local community, and how you promote who you are and the values that drive you as a company. And it can be hugely powerful, as well as massively impactful. So I think it is possible to do business in a transactional way in Africa, but it's much better to do business and build long-term relationships and build a long-term sense of commitment to that country, to that city, to that local community, whatever your business, wherever you are active. And I think it pays extraordinary dividends, including for your bottom line. And I think we have seen that again repeatedly as a business model for Africa, is to come in to understand the community, to understand the country that you're looking to do business in, and realize how you can help and how you support and how you actually build an ever greater, more prosperous market for you to do business with in the future. So it's about win-win business for me.
Right, and presumably local content regulations and requirements like those also play a part in that?
No, absolutely, and I think it's a fairly regular feature of business in Africa. You've got local content rules that vary depending on the sector and the industry and the country. But this is part of a strong drive by Africa's governments to build their own capability, and I think that is a positive thing. And what we see on the back of that is more local partners to be able to work with, a really interesting sharing of knowledge and experience and expertise, which ultimately I think brings benefits and greater profits to both sides. So I do think it might seem a bit of a bore to have to think, gosh, how do I find my local content provider? We can help you with that as the Department for International Trade. That's part of what we are here to help with. But I do think it's a positive part of doing business is to find those local partners. They help you understand and to navigate the market, to know who to talk to, who not to talk to, and actually what you then see is better products, marketed better, and therefore more successful.
Right, okay. So rather than thinking of those kinds of things as barriers to trade, that fits into this broader picture of closer working relationships on the ground in those markets.
Yeah, and absolutely. And one of the things that came out of the Africa Investment Summit at the beginning of the year was we entered into a partnership with Invest in Africa, and their focus is around supporting African SMEs so that there is more supply chain, there are more local partners to choose from. So when we're faced with that challenge of find X% of local content in order to get this business deal over the line, actually we have that pool of talent and expertise already in place, and we know them and we've worked with them and we know that they understand how to work internationally.
Great, thank you. As we speak, we're coming up to the end of the implementation period before the UK leaves the European Union, and one of the discussions we've seen is around firms that may be used to exporting from the UK into European markets, perhaps considering whether there are exporting opportunities further afield, and in this case into Africa. Is the UK government seeing or expecting an increase in interest in exporting to Africa after the Brexit transition period ends at the end of this year? And if so, how is it gearing up for that?
Well, look, I've seen over the last few years actually a growing level of interest across the UK business community in doing business in Africa. And we've seen that play through in terms of the number of inquiries we get to our inquiry point, the number of companies that get in touch to say, I'm interested in doing this. I do this in Asia or I do this in Europe. And we think Africa might be the next opportunity for us. So we've already seen this upward trend. So I absolutely hope that will continue, because what we're also seeing, despite some of the challenges and the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are still seeing really exciting opportunities, and indeed, actually, depending on your sector, possibly more opportunities as we're seeing sort of quite dramatic changes in the way that business can be done. But in terms of what we're doing to gear up, I mean, we've spent the last few years working really hard to transition the free trade arrangements that we've got across the African continent, and to underpin that with a UK generalised scheme of preferences and a UK global tariff, so that at least we are providing some continuity to those trading arrangements. But at a more practical level, I suppose, we've created a single inquiry point for anyone interested in exploring doing business in Africa, dit.africa@fcdo.gov.uk, and that through that we can connect you to any of the markets and a sort of network of experts to talk through your business ideas, your business strategy, and help navigate through some of that stuff. We've also been ramping up our work around market access barriers, so that we better understand actually what are those niggly, annoying and sometimes expensive and time-consuming issues that make it harder for UK and other international companies to go in and generate a new market opportunity, and increasing our footprint actually all across Africa. So over the last 18 months, we will have seen a 50% increase in the number of trade and investment staff across Africa. We've created a footprint in a number of new countries, for example, in Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Mauritania, and Guinea. And we are using our access to ODA money to reinforce our efforts around doing good business in the right way, and through doing business that we're also alleviating poverty. So a really innovative approach to blending ODA and non-ODA to hopefully provide a more robust service, a more expert service to UK companies looking to do business in Africa.
That's great. Presumably that, of course, relies on companies having the appetite to export. And you mentioned earlier around the work of the UK in discouraging governments from taking protectionist measures. But presumably there's that issue also applies to the private sector and to exporters. Is there a sense that companies are looking to onshore, potentially their appetite to export to Africa may not be particularly large at the moment?
So look, I totally understand these are unparalleled moments in time, and the pandemic has been a incredibly challenging, dramatic, and often horrible experience for many companies. What I would say is we know from the research, the evidence shows that exporting companies are usually more efficient, more profitable, benefit from the influx of new ideas and new experiences to keep improving products and services and processes. So I think exporting really is if you're not exporting now, now's a really good time to be thinking about it as you're trying to rebuild your company. I think Africa is a really exciting place to do it. Already you've got access to 1.3 billion people across the African market. You've got exciting things in the pipeline, like the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is around how do you actually just make it easier to see Africa as a single market of eye-watering proportions, rather than navigating through 54 different sets of terms and conditions, as it were. So the other thing about Africa, of course, large swathes of it speak English, which makes our lives a heck of a lot easier. A bunch of others speak French. So if you're already active in French-speaking markets, Francophone Africa is a natural next step. And if you've been working in Portugal or Brazil, you might actually think about some Lusophone African country activity as well. And so there's a lot of similarities and a lot of things that we recognise about Africa when we do business in terms of the sort of English law and very limited sort of time zone differences and the language that we speak. So I do think that Africa is exciting, and it is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, really.
That's great, thanks. My last question for you, just picking up on what you were saying around non-English speaking Africa, which must be presumably a daunting prospect for UK firms. The UK government has produced this priority list of markets in Africa for trade after Brexit, which is supported by UK export finance. To what extent do you think firms should be looking to those markets specifically, or to kind of traditional export markets for UK companies in Africa? Or should they be going in completely kind of blank slate, open-minded to opportunities elsewhere?
So I think the thing for me about Africa is that it's really dynamic, and we're seeing so much stuff changing and shifting and improving. There is a very clear direction of travel, which is overall improvement and strong economic growth in large parts of the African continent, and a diversification as well. So when I think about what we do, our big focus is around how do we bring technology to bear across all of the sectors? How do we inspire more green economy, growth and activity? But the reality is that there are opportunities across pretty much every sector that you might think of. And actually almost every market in Africa. So DIT has a presence in 23 countries, but we are always hearing and seeing of companies that are going in and exploring opportunities outside of those 23 countries. And as you say, within the 23, you have to prioritize to some degree. But what I always say is actually it's really important to protect the breadth of our presence, because you never quite know when the next opportunity is going to pop up. And we are always impressed actually at those opportunities popping up in some of the perhaps less likely places, perhaps less traveled places. Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, Morocco are kind of obvious markets, and they're obvious because they're big and they've got great potential, and we've got bigger teams there as a consequence of that. But where we've got smaller teams and perhaps slightly more niche opportunities, those other countries, there are really dynamic things happening, and underpinned, of course, by UK export finance risk appetite. And I should say that we are delighted that they've now, UK export finance have more than doubled their market risk appetite for Africa as a whole. I'm really excited about how we can see that driving more trade between us. And as part of that, I know that you'll hear from UK export finance people as part of this wider event, but we are putting our money where our mouth is, and we are quintupling the number of UK export finance officers physically based in Africa to really help drive those trading deals. So it's exciting times. And we now just need more UK companies to come and explore those and come and talk to us about it.
Great, thanks very much. That's I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has tuned in to listen to this session on demand, and I hope you enjoy the rest of GTR Africa 2020 virtual. And of course, thanks again to Emma Wade-Smith for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, Emma. Thank you.